I didn't show up to my own wedding. And honestly, looking back, I'd make that same choice again in a heartbeat. It's hard to explain to people how a surprise, one that was supposedly meant to heal a family, could end up destroying a relationship instead. But that's exactly what happened. I'm Ethan. I'm 32 years old, and until about 3 months ago, I was absolutely convinced I was going to marry Chloe, the woman I thought was the love of my life. We'd been together for 4 years, and everything just felt right. Until it didn't. Until she decided my deeply rooted trauma was something she could just fix, without my permission. This is the story of how I walked away from an altar I never even reached, and why I genuinely don't regret a single second of it. The thing about cutting off your parents, truly cutting them out of your life, is that most people never really get it. Not until you painstakingly spell out every single detail for them. And even then, they often think you're exaggerating, or being overly dramatic. But the truth is, I haven't spoken to my mom or dad since I was 18 years old, and believe me, I had rock-solid reasons for that decision. Growing up in that house, in that town just outside Phoenix, was like walking on eggshells every single day. Every single day. You never knew what tiny, innocent thing would set them off. I was constantly being told I was worthless, or stupid, or just a complete disappointment. My dad had a temper that could flip like a switch, a terrifying, instant explosion. And my mom? She enabled every bit of it, adding her own special brand of insidious emotional damage to the mix. By the time I graduated high school, I understood I had 2 choices: either I stayed, and let them completely destroy whatever was left of me, or I left, and tried to build a life where I actually, genuinely mattered. I chose myself. And I never, ever looked back. When I met Chloe 4 years ago, I was completely upfront about my family situation. From day one. I told her my parents weren't in my life, that it wasn't up for discussion, and that I had absolutely no intention of ever reconnecting with them. She looked at me, really looked at me, and said she understood. She told me everyone has complicated family dynamics, and that she respected my boundaries. I truly thought that was the end of it. I let myself believe her. Wedding planning started about 8 months before our big day. And one of the very first conversations we had was about the guest list. I remember sitting Chloe down at our kitchen table, the afternoon sun streaming in, and I made something crystal clear. My parents are not invited to this wedding, I told her. This is non-negotiable. I said it calmly, but with a firmness that left no room for doubt, looking her straight in the eyes so she'd know I meant every single word. She blinked a few times, like she was surprised, then reached across the table and squeezed my hand. She told me it was my wedding too, that she would never invite anyone who made me uncomfortable, and that we were building our own family now. I believed her. Completely. A week later, her mom, Carol, asked me about it when we were having dinner at their place. She wondered if maybe, just maybe, my parents might want to be involved somehow. I shut that down immediately, politely but firmly telling her they wouldn't be there, and that chapter of my life was closed. Carol looked at Chloe, then back at me, and said she understood. And Chloe backed me up in that moment, telling her mom she supported my decision 100%. Chloe's younger sister, Sarah, was supposed to be one of the bridesmaids. And even she seemed to grasp that some family situations are just too broken to ever truly fix. Everything felt fine. I let myself relax into the wedding preparations, thinking we were finally on the same page about everything that truly mattered. The first hint that something was terribly wrong came exactly 1 week before the wedding, on a Monday afternoon. I came home from work early and heard Chloe on the phone in our bedroom, the door half closed. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I was just grabbing a water from the kitchen when I caught part of what she was saying. He doesn't know yet. It's supposed to be a surprise, she whispered, that excited, almost giddy tone people use when they're planning something they think is incredibly clever. My stomach dropped like a stone. Immediately. Because in the context of our wedding, there was only one surprise that would require that kind of secrecy. One thing that could possibly send ice water coursing through my veins. I stood there, frozen in the hallway, trying desperately to convince myself I was being paranoid. Maybe she was talking about some other detail, like a special song or a cake flavor. But deep down, in that primal part of my gut, I already knew. And the knowing felt like a physical blow. She came out of the bedroom a minute later and nearly jumped out of her skin when she saw me standing there. I asked her what surprise she was talking about. Her eyes went wide, a literal deer-in-headlights look that told me everything before she even opened her mouth. The conversation that followed is burned into my memory forever. Chloe tried to laugh it off at first, saying it was nothing important, just some small detail she wanted to keep special. I didn't let her deflect. I asked again what surprise she meant, and this time my voice had an edge to it, a cold, hard tone that made her realize I wasn't going to drop it. She took a deep, shaky breath. And then she just said it. She'd invited my parents. The words hung in the air between us like a grenade that hadn't exploded yet. I stared at her, genuinely not sure if I'd heard her correctly. I asked her to repeat herself. She did. And this time she added that she thought it would be beautiful, that every person deserves to have their family at their wedding, that maybe seeing me happy and successful would help heal old wounds. I felt my hands start shaking. Not from sadness, but from pure, unadulterated rage. I reminded her that I'd specifically told her they were not welcome, that this wasn't up for discussion, that I'd made my boundaries crystal clear from day one. She tried to reach for me, but I stepped back, recoiling. That's when she started with the justifications. She said she'd been talking to her mom, Carol, about it for weeks. That they both felt like family was too important to just throw away. That she wanted to give me the gift of reconciliation. She actually used the word gift, like ambushing me with my abusers was some kind of generous, loving gesture. I told her she had no right to make that decision, that she'd betrayed my trust in the worst possible way, and that I needed her to uninvite them immediately. Chloe started crying then, saying she'd already confirmed everything with them weeks ago, that they were excited to come, that uninviting them now would be cruel. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was more concerned about the feelings of two people who'd made my childhood a living hell than she was about the person she was supposed to marry. I gave her an ultimatum right there in our living room. If they show up to that wedding, I said, my voice dangerously calm, I won't. She looked at me like I'd slapped her, asked if I was seriously threatening to leave her at the altar over this. I wasn't threatening anything. I was making a promise. You can have them there, or you can have me, I told her. But you can't have both. She kept crying, saying I was being unreasonable, that I was ruining everything, that she'd only done this because she loved me. That last part actually made me laugh, a hollow, bitter sound that didn't even feel like it came from me. Love doesn't mean trampling someone's boundaries and calling it a surprise, I said. Those were the last words I spoke to her before I grabbed my keys and walked out. I drove straight to my best man David's apartment in Phoenix. When he opened the door, he took one look at my face and didn't ask a single question. Just handed me a beer and pointed to his couch. At that point, I honestly didn't know if I was still getting married. That first night, I didn't sleep at all. I just sat on David's couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation with Chloe over and over. I tried to figure out how someone who claimed to love me could do something so fundamentally, terribly wrong. David didn't push me to talk about it right away. He just made coffee in the morning and sat across from me, patiently waiting until I was ready. When I finally told him what happened, his face went through about 5 different expressions before settling on pure disbelief. He asked if Chloe had lost her mind. And honestly, I was wondering the same thing. This wasn't some small disagreement about wedding colors or seating arrangements. This was her deciding that my clearly stated, non-negotiable boundaries didn't matter, because she thought she knew better. The more I sat with it, the angrier I got. Not just at what she'd done, but at the sheer calculation behind it. She hadn't told me because she knew I'd say no. And she'd waited until 1 week before the wedding because she thought I'd be too invested to back out. My phone started going off mid-morning on Monday with texts and calls from Chloe. At first, they were apologies, long, rambling messages about how she understood she'd made a mistake and how sorry she was for going behind my back. I read them but didn't respond, and that seemed to make her panic. By early afternoon, the messages shifted to justifications. She claimed her mom, Carol, had convinced her it was the right thing to do. That family should be together during important moments. That she truly believed seeing me successful and happy might change my parents somehow. I read every message and felt my resolve getting stronger with each one, because none of them addressed the actual problem. She wasn't sorry for violating my trust. She was sorry I was upset about it. There's a huge difference between those two things, and it told me everything I needed to know about how she viewed this situation. Monday evening, her messages took on a different tone entirely, getting defensive and almost angry. She said I was overreacting, being dramatic. That lots of people have complicated relationships with their parents and still include them in major life events. That message in particular made me want to throw my phone across the room, because she was comparing my situation to normal family tension, like my parents had just been a bit strict or occasionally annoying. The pattern continued for the next 3 days. Tuesday brought more apologies mixed with guilt trips about how much money had been spent and how many people were expecting a wedding. Wednesday, she tried a different approach, sending me photos from our relationship, reminding me of good times we'd had. Basically, trying to emotionally manipulate me into compliance. Thursday morning, she enlisted her sister Sarah to text me, asking if I was okay and saying Chloe was devastated. I finally responded to Sarah, not because I wanted to engage, but because she'd always been kind to me and deserved an explanation. I told her that Chloe had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. That this wasn't about cold feet or wedding jitters. It was about fundamental trust and respect. Sarah wrote back saying she understood. She admitted she'd tried to talk Chloe out of the surprise but had been shut down, and that she was sorry this was happening. At least someone in that family got it. David asked me multiple times over those days what I was going to do. And I told him honestly that I was still deciding. Part of me desperately wanted to believe this was just a massive error in judgment. That Chloe would come to her senses and somehow fix it. That we could move past this if she truly understood how badly she'd messed up. But another part of me, the part that had survived 18 years with my parents, was screaming that this was a red flag I couldn't ignore. The thing about boundaries is that they only work if people respect them. And Chloe had shown me that when it came down to it, she thought her feelings and her family's opinions mattered more than my explicitly stated needs. I kept thinking about what a marriage to her would look like. Whether I'd spend the rest of my life wondering when she'd decide to override my decisions again, all for my own good. Trust is everything in a relationship. And she'd shattered mine in one stupid, selfish move that she'd somehow convinced herself was an act of love. The wedding was supposed to be on a Friday afternoon at a beautiful venue outside Gilbert, Arizona. Thursday night, around 11 p.m., Chloe sent me one final text that was different from all the others. "Please just come tomorrow, we can figure everything else out after," she wrote. And that's when it clicked. I realized that was her strategy all along. She thought if she could just get me to that altar, surrounded by all our friends and family and my parents, I wouldn't be able to walk away. She was betting on my discomfort with public confrontation, betting that I'd swallow my anger and go through with it rather than cause a scene. That text was what made my decision final. Because it showed me she still didn't get it. This wasn't about the wedding or the guests or avoiding embarrassment. This was about the fact that I couldn't marry someone who thought my trauma was a problem to fix without my consent. I turned off my phone around midnight and told David I wasn't going. He just nodded, like he'd been expecting that answer all along. Friday morning felt surreal, like I was moving through a dream where nothing was quite solid. I woke up on David's couch knowing that right then Chloe was probably getting her hair done. That in a few hours she'd be putting on her dress. That guests were already starting to arrive at the venue. I felt guilty for about 10 seconds before I remembered why I wasn't there. And then the guilt transformed into something closer to grief. This should have been one of the happiest days of my life. And instead, I was hiding in my best friend's apartment, trying not to think about what was happening without me. David asked if I was sure about my decision. Not because he doubted me, but because he wanted to make absolutely certain I wouldn't regret it later. I told him I was sure that I'd rather deal with the fallout of a cancelled wedding than spend my life with someone I couldn't trust. He respected that. We spent the afternoon watching movies, pretending this was just a normal day off work. I found out later what happened at the venue. Pieced together from messages David got from other groomsmen and some posts people made online before they realized the full situation. Guests started arriving around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Everyone dressed up and excited, completely unaware that the groom wasn't coming. Chloe was in the bridal suite getting ready with Sarah and her bridesmaids. And apparently, she kept asking if anyone had heard from me, getting more anxious as time went on. My parents showed up right on schedule. My dad in a suit I'd never seen before, and my mom wearing what people described as a very elaborate dress. They seemed thrilled to be there, according to witnesses, smiling and greeting Chloe's family like they were honored guests instead of uninvited crashers. The ceremony was supposed to start at 3 o'clock. By 2:45, people were getting restless, murmuring about where I might be. David had texted me one last time right before he was supposed to walk down the aisle, one final chance to change my mind. But my phone was off, and even if it hadn't been, my answer would have stayed the same. 3 o'clock came and went with no groom. Chloe sent Sarah out to check if I was in the parking lot or maybe having some kind of crisis in my car. By 3:15, the murmuring had turned into full conversations. People pulling out their phones and texting each other, asking what was going on. At 3:30, the wedding coordinator went into the bridal suite. And I can only imagine what that conversation was like. Chloe realizing that I'd meant what I said. That I actually wasn't coming. The wedding was officially called off around 3:45. Guests were told there had been an emergency and everyone should go home. Chloe's family was apparently mortified. Her mom, Carol, kept trying to call my phone, which went straight to voicemail. And my parents? They were absolutely furious. According to David, my dad made a huge scene in the parking lot, yelling about disrespect and embarrassment, saying I'd always been an ungrateful child, and this proved it. Several people tried to calm him down, but he just got louder. And eventually, someone from the venue had to escort him to his car. He left me a voicemail during all of this, one I didn't listen to until much later. And hearing that voicemail reminded me exactly why I cut them off in the first place. I waited until Saturday evening to listen to the voicemail my dad left. Partly because I needed to mentally prepare myself, and partly because I already knew it would be bad. David offered to listen to it first as a buffer, but I told him this was something I needed to face myself. I put my phone on speaker and hit play. And within the first 5 seconds, I was transported right back to being a kid in that house. My dad's voice was pure, unadulterated rage. That specific tone he used when he wanted to make sure you understood how worthless you were. He called me every name he could think of. Said I'd humiliated him and my mother in front of strangers. Said I'd always been a disappointment. And this stunt proved I'd never amount to anything. He went on for almost 2 minutes, his voice getting louder and more vicious. And then right at the end, he said something that actually made me laugh, a dark, bitter chuckle. He told me I'd better apologize to him and my mother for this disrespect, that I owed them that much after everything they'd done for me. The irony of him demanding an apology while leaving a voicemail like that wasn't lost on me. And I saved the recording because I knew it might be useful later. Sunday morning, I finally turned my phone back on fully and found 63 missed calls and over 100 text messages. Most were from Chloe, some from her mom, Carol, a few from various relatives and friends asking what happened. I ignored all of them except one from David, asking if I was still alive. To which I responded that I was fine and would explain everything later. Then I did something I probably should have done years ago. I sent the voicemail recording to Chloe with a single line of text explaining that this was why those people weren't welcome in my life. I didn't expect it to change anything, but I wanted her to hear with her own ears what I'd been trying to protect myself from. She didn't respond right away, and I figured she was either too angry to reply or had finally realized she didn't have any moral high ground to stand on. The silence was almost worse than the constant messages had been, because it meant she was actually thinking instead of just reacting. Chloe finally called me Monday afternoon, and her voice sounded completely different than it had in any of our previous conversations. She was quiet, almost timid, and she started by saying she'd listened to the voicemail 3 times because she couldn't believe what she was hearing. I had no idea it was that bad, she said, and I could tell she was crying. She apologized for not understanding, for thinking she could fix something she didn't fully comprehend, for putting her vision of a perfect family reunion above my safety and well-being. It was the first real apology I'd gotten from her. The first time she'd acknowledged that she'd been fundamentally wrong instead of just sorry I was upset. But here's the thing about apologies. They don't erase what happened. I told her I appreciated her finally understanding, but that the damage was done. Trust isn't something you can just apologize back into existence, especially when it's been broken this badly. She asked if we could meet in person to talk. And after some hesitation, I agreed, because I figured we both deserved actual closure rather than just ending things over the phone. Before I could meet with Chloe, her mom, Carol, called me on Tuesday morning. I almost didn't answer because I wasn't in the mood for another lecture about the importance of family, but something made me pick up. Carol started the conversation by defending the surprise, saying that every child should have their parents at their wedding regardless of past issues, that forgiveness was important, that holding grudges only hurt the person doing the holding. I listened to her entire speech without interrupting. And when she finally paused for breath, I asked her a simple question. I asked if she'd want her daughter to marry someone whose parents had spent 18 years tearing her down, making her feel worthless, creating an environment where she never felt safe or valued. Carol went quiet. I could practically hear her trying to figure out how to respond. Then I told her about specific incidents from my childhood. Not the worst ones, because those were too painful to share, but enough to paint a clear picture of what my normal had been. I explained that my dad's temper wasn't just occasional anger. It was a constant presence that shaped every moment of every day. I told her my mom had never once stood up for me, had actively participated in making me feel like I deserved the mistreatment I got. By the time I finished talking, Carol was silent. And when she finally spoke again, her voice was shaky. She said she hadn't known. That Chloe had told her I was estranged from my parents, but hadn't explained the severity of it. That if she'd understood, she would never have encouraged the surprise. I told her I appreciated that, but it didn't change the fact that her daughter had made a choice that showed she valued other people's opinions more than my explicitly stated boundaries. Chloe and I met at a coffee shop on Wednesday afternoon. Neutral territory, where neither of us had home field advantage. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept since the wedding that wasn't, and she'd clearly been crying recently. We sat down across from each other, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything. Finally, she spoke, telling me she understood now why I'd made the choice I did. That listening to that voicemail had opened her eyes to things she'd been willfully blind to before. She said her mom had called her after our conversation and had been horrified by the details I'd shared, that her whole family now understood this wasn't about me being stubborn or unforgiving. I nodded and thanked her for finally getting it. But then I had to ask the question that had been eating at me all week: why hadn't you just believed me in the first place? Why did you need proof before my word was enough? She didn't have a good answer for that. Just said she'd thought she was helping, that she genuinely believed love could heal anything if people just tried hard enough. We talked for over 2 hours about everything: the relationship, the wedding, the future. I told her I couldn't marry her. Not after this. Not when I'd spent the last week questioning every decision we'd ever made together. She started crying again and asked if I was breaking up with her. And I realized I didn't actually know the answer to that question. What I knew was that I wasn't ready to marry someone I couldn't trust. That the foundation we'd built over 4 years had massive cracks in it. I need time, I told her, and I could see the hope flash across her face before I clarified what I meant. I explained that we needed to take a real pause. Not just a few days to cool off, but actual separation, where we both figured out if this relationship was something that could truly be saved. I wasn't ready to throw away 4 years without really thinking about it. But I also couldn't pretend nothing had happened. She asked what a pause would look like, and I told her honestly that I didn't know. That we'd be living separately, not really together, but not completely broken up either. She nodded and said she understood. That she'd do whatever it took to rebuild my trust if I was willing to eventually let her try. We left the coffee shop without any solid answers, just an agreement that we'd figure things out as we went. Chloe went back to the apartment we'd shared, and I stayed at David's place while I looked for my own spot. Over the next few weeks, we texted occasionally, mostly surface-level stuff about how we were doing. Nothing deep or meaningful. I spent a lot of time thinking about whether I'd made the right choice, whether walking away from the altar had been brave or cowardly, whether a relationship could ever truly recover from something like this. Some days I thought maybe eventually we could find our way back to each other, that if she really understood what she'd done wrong, and if I could learn to trust her again, we might have a chance. Other days, I was certain that what she'd done was unforgivable, that the person who truly loved me wouldn't have put me in that position, regardless of their good intentions. The truth is, I still don't have all the answers, and I'm not sure I will for a long time. Right now, Chloe and I are living separate lives, both trying to figure out who we are outside of the relationship we thought would last forever. Maybe someday I'll post an update telling you we worked through it and found our way back to each other. Maybe I'll tell you we officially ended things and moved on with different people. But for now, all I can say is that sometimes walking away from the altar is the only way to protect yourself. And sometimes the person you love most is the person who hurts you deepest. I don't regret my choice, not even on the days when I miss her so much it physically hurts. Because I know that marrying her that day would have meant sacrificing the boundaries I'd spent 14 years building. No relationship is worth losing yourself, no matter how much you love the other person. That's what I learned from all of this, and it's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. What would you have done if you were in my shoes?